which is the oil spill bill that is going to be debated in Parliament today. And these Jagdeo and Nandalal, a few days before they start rolling this bill out, they want us to believe, to not believe what we see and what we hear. After they want us to believe that they have suddenly have an epiphany of the change of mind in supporting unlimited liability coverage for this nation, something that they've opposed, they've fought, they've waged a war against it for 5 years. But now they suddenly want us to believe that they've had this sudden change. This bill is a scam. One international environmental lawyer called it garbage. And some other experts call it all kinds of different names that I'm not going to repeat here. But here it is. They've opposed it for 5 years, and then suddenly say, well, okay, we're agreeing to exactly the same thing that we've been opposing. There is nothing here. All they're doing, they're putting words into this bill. For example, the responsible party has to be responsible for all liability. We all know that it's in the law already. However, you can put whatever you want into the law that they're responsible, but if there is no financial assurances to cover it, which is exactly why we implemented the parent company guarantee. Judge Kissoon overwhelmingly ruled in our favor, our meaning when we're in office. And now they're coming up as if they suddenly have an epiphany of mind and they've been enlightened. Well, if you've been enlightened, say that you're enlightened, you made a mistake, but they're not saying that. They're looking. Now this man they want to claim as if they're putting this bill, as if they're now the fathers of unlimited liability coverage. As a matter of fact, he had the nerve to say that it was the AFC Nigel Hughes who may have been in contact with Exxon to not have unlimited liability coverage, but they are now for liability coverage. He's saying that, oh, we are now solving a problem. Well, I think they call it a firefighter syndrome, where you set the fire just to go and douse the fire and then want to take credit and to glorify over it. So this bill here, it's I just want to bring to the attention of the people of Guyana. It's a major scam. Everything that they're putting into this bill, it's already into law, except that there's no financial assurance to guarantee what they're saying there in terms of responsible party who's supposed to be covering everything. No, we should be calling, as a matter of fact, the AFC is calling on them right now to apologize to this nation for bringing us through a trauma for 5 years. For 5 years, they've been putting this nation into a trauma. They need to, at a minimum, apologize. You cannot expect a government to make such a humongous shift in policy without a single explanation to the people as to what changed their mind. What is the logic behind changing their mind? The public welcome it, but how could you make such a big policy shift without letting the public know? So we're calling on them to give an explanation and to apologize not only to the nation, but to apologize to the two people that filed the lawsuit to represent the position of the law. The people that filed the lawsuit, they need to apologize to them. And here's the nonsensical part of this bill, more than anything else. They are proposing a bill that opposes what they're appealing in court right now. They're appealing against the unlimited liability coverage, but now they're passing a bill. So let them withdraw their appeal for that unlimited liability coverage that they're opposing before they can vote for this bill. That's the only thing that makes sense. You cannot have both at the same time. It's stupid, it's nonsensical, and basically just senile. Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent Adams. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now entertain your questions.
Sorry,
let me remind. Oh, sorry, Nigel. Go ahead.
I know, I'm not in person, so I'm likely to be overlooked. Good afternoon, members of the press. Just 3 topics, the most important perhaps being the border. I will read last. The first one is the failure of the Guyana Police Force to charge one of their own with the murder of Keon Fujine in Linden. You will remember that Mr. Fujine was shot while protesters were on the road at Half Mile. He was not part of the protest. He was on his way home and he was shot through his eyes. There is video footage, and I actually accompanied an eyewitness by the name of Mr. Sulker to the Wisma police station on the night of one of the protests, and he gave a detailed statement to the police, not only recounting what took place, but identifying the officer who shot Mr. Fujine. We repeat our demand that the person responsible for murdering Mr. Fujine be charged forthwith. The fact that they've charged one police officer with the first killing is not enough. And so we repeat that request for the charge because we know the evidence exists and the evidence has been given to the Guyana Police Force. I was present when the statement was taken by the Office of Professional Responsibility. The difficulty with not charging him is it continues to result in the erosion of the public confidence in the Guyana Police Force. The second topic I'd like to speak about very briefly is the question of assistance coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation into the death of young Adriana Young. The United States government, friend of Guyana, virtual guarantor of the integrity of our western border, and country of the largest investor in this country, has made it clear through the personage of the ambassador that the services of the Federal Bureau of Investigation are available to assist in the investigation into the death of young Adriana. This country, the diaspora, the Caribbean, and the world have been traumatized not only by her death, not only by the manner of her death, but what appears to be a concerted effort on the part of the Guyana Police Force and the government of Guyana not to investigate this death thoroughly. We are now becoming an international shame and disgrace as a country as a result of our failure to do the most basic of investigations, where there is more than adequate reason why the Guyana Police Force ought not to investigate. And now, to put the icing on the cake, we have a friendly government saying we are willing to assist. That government possesses perhaps amongst the most capable forensic capacities in the world at the moment, and it is willing to allow itself to assist into solving this. And all it requires, and I just wish to remind the members of the public, all it requires is a simple request from the government of Guyana. Nothing complicated. A simple request to the United States for assistance. The Alliance for Change calls and insists that the government of Guyana make that request immediately. We've already had significant erosion of the evidence, but we believe that this can be solved pretty quickly. As you know, there are at least 4 satellites that are constantly monitoring the shoreline of this country. The hotel is located very proximate to the shoreline of this country. And with a modest expense, you can get the footage of what actually happened in that hotel for the 24-hour period between the time young Adriana went missing and the difficulties that arose later in the afternoon. So we insist that that be done, and the American ambassador was gracious enough to say that the American government is willing to assist, and on behalf of the Alliance for Change, we wish to thank the American government for making that assistance available. Finally, permit me to read a statement in relation, penultimately. We are now months away from national elections, and we still have not had the benefit of the census. This is a national disgrace. It's not even a scandal. It is a complete and absolute disgrace that 2 years after the census is due, literally 2 or 3 weeks after the Minister of Home Affairs says that there are literally 19 Venezuelans in Region 4, 2 weeks after the fact that we were so embarrassed by the statement of the Minister of Home Affairs, we still do not have the census. We are a country in free fall. Finally, the Alliance for Change wishes to reiterate its unmitigated and unreserved support to the defense of Guyana's borders, its territorial integrity, and for the efforts and sacrifices of our brave men and women in uniform. The Alliance for Change condemns the latest brazen attack of criminality committed by forces of Venezuela when they attacked ranks and officers of the Guyana Defense Force yesterday, May the 15th, while on patrol in the Ettering area of Region 1. This latest attack has to be located on a graph that shows a deliberate and steady escalation of the attacks and provocations against Guyana. For the past 6 months, we have experienced the following incidents. In December 2024, the declaration of the opening of a bridge linking Venezuela to mainland and Coco Island, which you all know is the territory of Guyana. In January 2025, the announcement that elections would be held in a fantasy region known as Guyana Essequibo for the election of a governor and legislative council. In February 2025, the shooting and almost fatal wounding of soldiers on patrol in the Cuyuni River. In March 2025, the incursion into Guyana's territorial waters and exclusive economic zone by patrol vessel identified as ABF Guayaquiri PO11, a Venezuelan Coast Guard vessel. In May 2025, the rejection of the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and its conservatory orders to halt the planning and execution of the purported elections to be held on May 25th, 2025. And now, this week, the coordinated shooting once again in 3 separate incidents within a matter of hours at GDF soldiers who were clearly in uniform. This emerging pattern is clear and undeniable. It shows that a rogue state in Venezuela is waging an undeclared war against Guyana. The pattern further suggests that despite the known consequences and repercussions, Venezuela intends to stage a special military operation in the Essequibo region. Venezuela's use of military force yesterday, dressed in civilian garb, is eerily similar to the little green men who took over Crimea in 2014. And the tactics being deployed here are very identifiable and fit that scenario. Venezuela may want to feign non-involvement and try to avoid culpability, but its imprint is indelibly marked on the latest attack. There is no mistaking that this was an attack by Venezuela against soldiers of Guyana. The AFC stands ready to support the fair and reasonable efforts of the government and once again demands the reconvening of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Assembly and the bipartisan Border and National Security Committee that previously existed. This is no time for scoring cheap political points or gaining an adage before elections. Our Guyana, as we know it, faces an existential threat which could only be repelled by an all-of-nation response. Additionally, the government of Guyana, in addition to briefing its allies and partners, must consider taking drastic and decisive steps to demonstrate its resolve, which may include the expulsion of the Venezuelan ambassador, the recalling of Guyana's ambassador in Caracas, and making a request to the United Nations Security Council to rebuke and sanction Venezuela. We must stop being passive and turning the other cheek. The AFC awaits to be engaged in the interim and calls on all Guyanese to be vigilant, prepared, and supportive of those on the front line. I thank you.
Thank you, Nigel Hughes, leader of the Alliance for Change. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, we will now take your questions. I ask that you use the raise hand feature. I see one hand raised. I'm trying to identify the person.
Alicia Ramnarain.
Yes, Ramnarain, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alicia from Stabrook News. I have 3 questions that I'd like to ask. One, if you guys think that the NTC has ever yielded any practical, meaningful outcomes so far since it's in existence. Number 2, if there's any update that you can give us on your talks with the PNC, if you guys have decided to definitively go at it independently. And 3, the party's position on Vibes Cartel, and him coming here to perform. Thank you.
Thank you, Talisha. We have with us Mr. David Patterson, but first I will ask Laura George to speak on your first question. Has the NTC yielded any meaningful outcomes since its inception? Laura?
Thank you, Beverly, and thank you, Ms. Ramnarain. I wish not to be so pessimistic, but the level of outcomes, and what has been yielded, any practical yields, to some extent, I would say that it has been a forum where villages identify, priority projects that need immediate attention, such as their access to water challenges. So then, you have a minister outlining where communities will be getting these projects going. The setbacks to this have been that the amount allocated for projects are already outlined by the government of Guyana prior to without consultation with communities. So there's already a plan that is made and presented to the communities. And when the project is taken to the community, then it is a challenge because it is not one that is planned by the community. It's not included by the community is not included. So the team determines exactly where this is going to be projected. And then the next thing you know is that water system breaks down very, very quickly, and there is no effective recourse to get it working. But the critical point for having a conference like this is where policy development needs to be discussed, legislative reform, program implementation, the challenges, the issues and opportunities. This need to be the point where these are discussed and plans agreed upon, next steps agreed. But every year, the conference, the time is taken on individual projects or individual village issues, and therefore the larger picture is not addressed. The policy direction of what it should mean, for example, for the rights of indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent in policy design, what legislative reform is needed is not addressed. So you have an announcement, for example, every year, the Amerindian Act is going to be revised. Up to now, from 2020 to this is 2025, that act has not been revised. So to a large extent, what practical What has it yielded? The most important part, I believe, has been where Toshaws get to know each other. Talk about not all of them get to present their challenges, but I think they've gotten to caucus with each other. But that is not what this conference should be about, right? So I will just keep my answer like that.
Thank you, Laura. I will now ask the chairman of the Alliance for Change, Mr. David Patterson, who is online also, to give an update on the talks with the PNC, and also he can share any views the AFC may have on the Vibes Cartel show. David, are you still there? David?
My
David,
apologies.
muted.
My apologies. I was muted. My apologies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Honorine, there is no new updates in relation to the talks with the PNC, APNU. From the last time we spoke, the party would have announced that since the expiration of our time, that we have commenced and continue to commence to make preparations to contest the 2025 elections. Although I must say, as I said before, nomination day is the drop dead day. And there is, so technically there is a possibility, but at the moment we have made our preparations and we stated our opinion. And so I have no new updates on that. Vibes Cartel show, that's an interesting one. While we do acknowledge Mr. Cartel's performances and his entertaining abilities, and while we do acknowledge that he has a large following not only in Guyana as well as the Caribbean and maybe even further upstream, we also have to be mindful that, and we do hope that the promoters would have spoken to him, that songs and lyrics which offend various communities, he has a large repertoire. So songs which offend various communities should not be performed. And we're talking about, I see the ERC has made a statement about one of his songs. We're talking about songs that promote violence or the use of drugs, or particularly in Guyana, violence towards women. We would hope that they would have spoken to him and encouraged him while he's here not to perform those songs. He has a large repertoire of songs, so therefore obviously any concert that he holds will be entertaining without any of these songs that may offend portions of our society. It is a free country, but we note that that certain songs and lyrics that he has can be offensive to certain sections of society. We do hope that the promoters, as recommended by the ERC, speak to him and he can just exclude those songs before. This was done with Butcher Bantan. I can remember when Butcher Bantan visited Guyana. He had a particular song which adversely affected a particular sector of our community, and he was able to perform a really good concert by excluding that song. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I recognize Antonio Day.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Antonio.
Okay. I have a question directed to Ms. Laura George. Ms. George, you are aware that there are extant matters in communities such as Chinese landing and Jawala when it comes to land demarcation. I would like to know, what are your concerns, if any, on this matter, because the Minister of Marine Affairs has been saying that she's rectifying the issue, but to date we have not seen any resolution in this subject. And secondly, given that communities such as Arau, Ettering Bang, and other areas are closer to the Cayenne area, which is not too far from Venezuela. I would like to know what are your concerns when it comes to if these communities are more susceptible to any attacks from the Sindicato gangs, as well as Venezuelan army officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Laura? Land
Thank you.
demarcation and concerns of communities close to the border with Venezuela.
Thank you, Antonio. Let me go first with the first issue of the land demarcation and the issues, and the minister being quoted as saying that she's dealing with these issues, which ties into the first question, or to the question of the previous reporter as well. What practical solutions have the NTC conference yielded? It's like, no, and that's what I was saying, is like, while I don't want to be pessimistic, the practicality of the NTC conference has been, it has not yielded response to policy, legislative, and program and other areas there. So that's why we continue to have Jawala's situation. I will tell you this: every single year, they would take individual to shows from sub-regions who have mining issues or who have forestry issues, and it's a similar issue, or it's the same issue from the previous years. And so there has always been this band-aid, elusive response that they give to the Tushaus every year. It's disrespectful. It wastes the time of the Tushaus and the communities. It's disrespectful to them because we're trying to make them feel that it's being addressed when it is not being addressed. And so every year, land rights issues or land issues come back to the conference. It's not addressed. So which is why we are recommending that if communities or the Tushaus who are brought here are given their own caucus, independent of government officials, to say, look, we have presented this prior years. These are the issues we've presented, recommendations we've made. We're seeking practical, effective responses from the government. If you're not, because you haven't done this, how do we hold you accountable? So those are discussions Tushaus need to have independently before they meet with government officials. That's very important, right? That is why that recommendation is there. In relation to the border communities along close to the border with Venezuela, they are very much under threat. And let me explain why. Residents, as I remember I said, we have lived beyond borders and have maintained this kind of relationship up to today. So you have persons, Guyanese, from Arau, Kaikan, Itiringbang, and those areas there, Kurtuku, who live back and forth with Venezuela. So we have to address, Guyana has to address, how do we deal with these persons who live on the Venezuela shore, who might very well be under pressure to vote along with Venezuela, under pressure and perhaps intimidated or threatened by the Venezuelan army or by the government itself. How do we deal with those? How do we guarantee protections to these persons who are living over there? Because they also live over here, and they've also been like the recipients of the cash grants and health education services and all of these things. This is a very sensitive area where, because if we listen to the commander of defense staff, I said Brigadier Omar Khan, who in his live or in a meeting in Itiringbang stated that persons who vote along with the Essequibo along with Venezuela's elections for governing of Essequibo will be, I'm sure he said, arrested. So the question here is, Guyana needs to let the Tushaus and the communities know if this is a policy decision rooted in legislation, because we need to have effective protections for our citizens, whilst also respecting that we have families, we have lived beyond these. So, and in relation to how much protection really Guyana is providing to the communities is still not convincing to the communities who live on the ground, because they know the extent of the Army personnel, Guyana's Army personnel based there. They have a very clear idea of the extent of arms or whatever they have there. And we're also very much aware of the lack of effective protection and services that we've given prior during incidents that have affected like our Army personnel. So we're very, they're very concerned. They're very concerned. As of like last week, Thursday, the residents of Arau and Kaikana and those places couldn't sleep because they reported that there were 3 boatloads of Army personnel that had at least 40 in each boat, Venezuelan soldiers. They further learned that it was a change of the guard that takes place, from time to time. The communities are aware of how many GDF personnel we have at each base at any time on our shores. And it has not been convincing and given us a guarantee that we are effectively protected. So that has to be amped up a lot.
Thank you, Laura. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Day. Any other questions? I don't see any other hand raised. If there's anyone out there with a question, please go ahead. I see Adam and then followed by Anassa. Adam Harris, please go ahead.
My question is directed, sorry, good afternoon, everybody. My question is directed to Mr. Hughes. Sir, you spoke about the police failing to charge the rank that killed Keon Fajane. But the police haven't charged anyone involved in the death of Adriana Young. Do you see a pattern of behavior in the Guyana police force when it comes to crimes that are committed against anyone who's not involved in the government?
Good afternoon, Adam. Thank you for the question. I think the police have long established and earned the reputation for incapacity to investigate and prosecute persons where the police are involved in the death or in the homicide or the killing of persons. And it's not until an international hue and cry is made that happens. We had the 2 in Linden. If you want to go back before that, you had or in Boston, and if you want to go all the way back to Shaka Blair, there has been a consistent pattern by the Guyana police force. They don't wish to investigate. And in this case, apart from the murder of young Adriana, you have the very important question of why the police would have given such a misleading statement to deflect the search away from the hotel by falsely stating to the public, and more importantly, to the mother, that Adriana was seen leaving the hotel. And when they showed the mother the security footage, she said, "That is not my child." And yet the police continued to publish that report. That is particularly damning. That in and of itself, I think, indicts the Guyana police force, and they don't seem to realize that where people have little confidence in the force, the rule of law and law enforcement are very seriously threatened, because you are going to put the population in a position where they feel they have to act in their own defense, and they cannot rely on the police to maintain not only law and order, but to maintain the rule of law. And they seem to think that this is a political statement. It's not a political statement. Look at what Haiti looks like today, where there's no law and order and where the rule of law does not exist. We are in a very difficult place, and we still have time to, forgive the pun, arrest the situation.
Thank you, Nigel. Mr. Harris, do you have a follow-up? I see your hand still up.
Yes. My follow-up has to do with the fact that, well, I want to know, is there any way to get around this kind of situation where the police are refusing to act under certain conditions and people are left to their own devices? I'm not suggesting that the people go out there and do what they want to do, but is there any other way to deal with this situation, sir?
Yeah, there is. And Adam, I'm happy that you've cautioned people against going out there and behaving perhaps less than lawful. It is clear to every citizen that the Guyana Police Force can no longer protect or is committed to investigating. There is a minister that is responsible to the National Assembly for the operations of the Guyana Police Force. And since the Guyana Police Force and the government, by its refusal to take this seriously, the next step is for me to go where the money is. And that is to begin to speak to the foreign investors in Guyana about the jeopardies of continuing to invest in Guyana. Because it is now a stage where the citizens are no longer protected by the Guyana Police Force. That has an impact on the rule of law, and we should start speaking to major businesses who are investing in Guyana to reassess their investment in Guyana. All of us will suffer, but at least the prospect of that investment being tempered will bring the government to its senses about how serious this situation is. And you will recall that back in the 80s, that what brought South Africa to its senses wasn't the fact that there were acts of violence on the street, though that might have had an impact. It was the call for the economic boycott of South Africa. And I remember being a student where the student bodies had decided they were not buying South African products. And that brought the change. And if you want to see in Guyana not only the rule of law or the enforcement of law and order, but that citizens' rights are protected, you have to go after the money. And the people who invest in this country, if they want to invest in the country and support a government that has a police force that is condoning the killing of its citizens, one, by policemen, and two, where the police appear to be involved in the cover-up of a homicide, then your investment cannot be guaranteed as safe, because the next step for that is really going to be the breakdown of law and order.
I would
Thank
like
you.
to make a comment on that.
Please go ahead, Kemraj.
As former Minister of Public Security, there were major recommendations made from the British security sector, reform of the security sector that we had, and that were completed by, first of all, Mr. Sitlington and Russell Coombe. And it had to do with strategies to deal with violence and crime. It had to do with the human resource improvement of the Guyana Police Force, their salary structure, the terms and conditions of employment, and a whole heap of other things. And all these were done during the last APNU AFC government. And it was now for what is called the implementation of those recommendations. And I have asked Mr. Ben, the Prime Minister, and a number of other persons also who constitute members of what we call the Parliamentary Security Committee, which only once held a meeting in Parliament and never thereafter held any. So you can't get questions answered. But all these recommendations in about 6 or 7 reports are there. How to better the maritime, the aviation sector, security sector, and so on. Every single thing. They were completed in around 2019 by that very big expert that we call in, Mr. Russell Coombe. And do you know what I am hearing now is that this government has shelved all of that. It has gotten the wrath of the British High Commissioner because they spent over £3 million on that set of reforms, to the extent of putting it on paper and now to implement. And we had indicated by this time the oil monies are going to be the implementing finance source for executing on those recommendations. Why the government has not done the implementation beats me, but it just gives me the impression that there might be some sinister motive behind it. Look, I want to go this far at this stage to say, if you know that hotel there where this Adriana Young, beautiful child, was killed, had all manner of perverse activities by members of the then PPP government some years ago. A lot of things, and I probably is still continuing. And they don't want to, they want to help a friend that probably helped them in their perverse activities. The reporters in this country, and you, Adam Harris, would know when them fellas want their activities, weekend activities, where they go and which beach they go and all kind of nudism and what fart they do. That is the place they used to go. And so there's a payback, a quid pro quo. Now, some stupidness happened there, murder, not stupidness, deliberate action. What do you think they're going to do? That's a friend. And this is what is happening. They don't want the reports from the British security sector reform to come out and be implemented. No, they don't want that. They don't want the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee, which was so operational under my administration at the security sector, where they called the fire chief, they called the commissioner of prisons, they called the commissioner of police, and they asked them questions as to how the development is going on in relation to this crime strategy and that fire strategy and that prison strategy and all of that. But now we in the opposition can't even call the commissioner to find out. As a matter of fact, that commissioner ought to have gone a long time ago, but they have him there. And this is what you get when you could have deputy commissioner get $800 million in bank account. What do you really think is going to happen here? This thing needs reform. It needs fundamental alteration at the top. It requires leadership, and it requires the implementation of those reforms that Mr. Russell Coombe and Sam Siplington had literally recommended, and we a lot accepted. So indeed, as Nigel said, we need the international community to also state, but what is happening with all of these things? I met Mr. Russell Coombe. He came for a private visit to Guyana, and he's appalled a couple months ago. And this is important for the public to understand. And if you, as a member of the PPP and so on, now coming to realize all of these things, you too got to put your pressure. The press, the party member within inside there, because I understand all of them. We have gone to Bobis, Albion, and so on, and all of them vex. Well, if you're vexed now, please don't vote for them next time. And the international community put the pressure down. What has happened? Are we wasting our monies here? Nothing being implemented? Well, tell us what has been implemented. Why don't you convene the Parliamentary Security Committee meeting? It's almost the end of your term, and one single meeting. That's what I'd like to say.
Thank you, Mr. Kemraj Ramjitan. I recognize Anasa, and then we'll go back to Antonio.
Good
Anasa?
afternoon.
Good
Anasa
afternoon.
Williams, Culture News. This question is directed to either Mr. Patterson or Mr. Adams. So ExxonMobil has recovered over US 34 billion to date, which amounts to more than the cost of the first 4 projects in the Starbuck block. In light of this, who is the owner of these assets since they've already been paid off for?
I'll let Vince go first as follow-up.
Yeah, it's very simple. You know, I think we've been hearing this kind of foolishness from this vice president for say, I guess 5 years. The contract is clear at Article 20. All movable and fixed assets belong to the government of Guyana. It says there that at expiration or termination of the contract, all of these assets shall be returned to the government free of cost. If somebody has to return something to you free of cost, that means that it's your assets. Now, during the operation, they're allowed to use the assets, but cost style, or we're paying for those assets. So when the vice president comes up with this absolute dumbfounding statements that somehow we're going to seize these assets if we get an oil spill to pay for an oil spill, it's absolute nonsense. It's idiocy. But then in the context of ring fencing, yes, they have, the recoverable cost to date has been 34 billion, and I can't the forest, it covered like the first 4 projects or something, somewhere within that vicinity. The only problem is, you can guess or speculate that we've already paid off the 3 million for Lisa 1, and I think the 6 million for Lisa 2, which is billion, 9 billion. But we do not have, which shows the incompetence and laxity of this government, which is how Judge Kissoon described them, that we do not, if you go buy a house, what you get is what is called an amortization schedule that says every month you're paying this amount for interest, this amount goes towards the principal, and it tells you exactly when you're going to be finished. We do not even have that. This government cannot even tell us how much we're paying in interest or how much is coming out in capital costs. So we do not even know how much of that money, that 34 billion, actually went into capital costs. So no, the question is a valid question that we need to all be pushing this government to tell us how much of that has been gone into paying the mortgage cost and how much has been going into operation, because we know that's what determines how much profit we get. Cost oil, which is what it costs to run the project, is of course the capital cost that you're paying on the mortgage plus the operations cost, and wherever is left is divided in half. So every time if the projects were ring fenced, those 2 projects, we would have been the capital cost, 2 or 3 projects, whatever it is it covered, it would have gone away, and our profit would have increased because the only cost we would have been paying for is operations cost. So when I listened to him yesterday, and he himself he knows that he's talking nonsense when the question was asked, because anytime you hear somebody at the end of the question asking, well, do you understand what I said? They themselves doesn't even understand. And I know he himself doesn't understand because it was sheer nonsense that he was spouting.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent Adams. Mr. Patterson.
Lisa, yes. I acknowledge everything that and agree with everything that Vincent said. But let's get back to our real challenge. You know what I mean? We are saying that 34 billion has been cost recouped. Exxon, on the other hand, will probably say to prove it, and we can't, because we haven't had a completed audit ever in the history of our oil production, ever. You know what I mean? We don't know what happened, with the $270 million that the first audit threw up, nor the second audit, what the state of the second audit. And that's what, and this is, we're into the 5th year of oil production. So while we can say, I mean, as Vince has said, or, you know, I mean, the assets belong to the country anyway, and ring fencing would be there. We can't even prove where the fence starts and where it begins and where it ends. We have 2 audits, and we're probably going to go out, and we went up for the firm for the 3rd audit, and to date, we have not had a report laid there in definitive answer. The PP's term going to be expire sometime this year, and it will left with the new administration to clean up the mess and try to bring some sort of transparency and accountability to this process for the country. Thank you.
Let me add quickly here to what David just said, because we're relying upon these audits. Well, even the audits, when the first audit came in, you remember the $214 million scandal? That had to be leaked. The government does not even disclose that. And we've got auditors going in there without any authority, because imagine an auditor goes in, and then the auditor comes out and complains that Exxon is not even allowing them to see the meter or to see the production data. So to add to what David said, we do not have a clue as to what we're spending money for. By the way, let me add, because this is very important, in the coalition government, we came up, our plan was to have, starting even at the EPA, we went to the World Bank, and they brought in an expert. We developed a document, a plan to have on board exports, petroleum exports, on board the ship 24/7 to monitor everything that goes on, so we can get the information firsthand to assist if whatever audit is being conducted, to assist those audits. But the more eyes you have on board to see it every day, the better. They abolished that. They abolished it. I'm not talking about this nonsense about, well, we've got this feed back into our office. That's a bunch of baloney. But it comes from ignorance, I guess, and they really don't care.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Antonio Day, I recognize you.
Yes, good afternoon again. Mr. Hughes and Mr. Ramjatan, I have a question directed to you. Either of you can answer. As you're aware that the Article 347, Paragraph 1 of the Criminal Offences Act speaks to inciting blasphemous libel. And this is in the context of the ERC reprimanding this guy, Baby Skello, which you know of. I would like to know, you guys have been lobbying for constitutional reform, because when I peruse the documents of the Constitution, while the Defamation Act of 1957 speaks to slander and libel, what warrants it, I noticed that in the Criminal Offences Act, it doesn't speak to anything pertaining to slander. It only highlights libel. So I would like to know if this is a grave concern for you guys as legal experts.
Mr. Hughes, would you answer that?
Antonio, I'm not clear as to what the specific question is. Whether the offense set out in the Criminal Law Offences Act, which is an indictable offense as opposed to the Summary Offences Act, whether I'm not sure what you're asking. If you can clarify the specific question.
Okay, Mr. Hughes, my question is, if you're concerned, because you know defamation includes libel and slander, but
Yeah.
I noticed in the Criminal Offences Act, it only highlights blasphemous libel, but it does not state anything pertaining to slander, because contextually, this is the case with Baby Skello. He would have released the audio, and it would have incited, it would have disrespected one's or another person's religion. So I wanted to know that given that this is not in the provisions of the Constitution, if this would be a grave concern for you or Mr. Ramjatan, given you guys have been lobbying for constitutional reform, if my question is better structured.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm sure Kemraj will chime in as well. We have always had reservations about criminal defamation. I certainly don't think that in this day and age there should be criminal defamation. You're not going to the issue of blasphemy in relation to libel, but not in relation to slander. I hope your audience understands the difference between the two. But what I will say, one, at a general level, is the entire criminal code, both the summary jurisdiction and the criminal jurisdiction, as well as the recent offenses, needs to go through a periodic review, because what happens that there are laws sitting on the statute book that are clearly out of date and oppressive. I can just pick one of them, for example, vagrancy. Vagrancy is on the book. It shouldn't still be there on the book. But to come to blasphemous libel and that difference, I certainly think it should be removed. What the Constitution does is a separate purpose. The Constitution protects your rights. For example, your right to free speech, and those rights are limited to certain conditions and restrictions. So I don't think the Constitution itself addresses this. I think what has to happen is that section in particular needs to be revised.
I agree with Nigel, and this is for the questioner, because indeed you want a strong provision for freedom of expression. I have written extensively on this. I think one of the Bar Association review, I did a major article on it. Wither the press, meaning where should it go? Or it could be wither, meaning that it is drying up. And I have a liberal perspective on these matters. Blasphemous, whether it is written form or speaking form, should not necessarily be in our laws at this stage, because the freedom of expression is an expansive liberal right that we should all enjoy. However, you have to understand that you just can't cry fire in a cinema and get everybody confused to the extent that you can create more harm and create a present danger of harm. And to that extent, then, we have to be cautious as to how we strike the balance. And that is what the constitutional reform process must allow the people to understand. How far could we go with freedom of expression? Because you can have hate speech, you can have racial damaging, insensitive remarks, and people could jump back, like in some countries, and say, well, but that is freedom of expression, freedom of the press. And it could create serious harm, just like what some people are doing now in relation to the lyrics of that Kello and what's the fella's name that is coming in, Vicab or Vibiz. The trouble is, where do we put that line? For some liberals, you're going to have it at a different place as against some conservative religious people and so on. But I agree with you. I have my concerns as to where it should be, and the constitutional reform process should have it. But there are lots of laws that were built in colonial times that we ought to get rid of in relation to blasphemous defamation and defamation that criminalizes conduct of political speech that could be very hard-hitting, and then you get people who would want to bring in, and under this cybercrime act, you can have a lot of activities also being criminalized. So we have to do a fundamental consultation with what we as a people think should be the red lines and the correct approach. Otherwise, we can have a withering of freedom of expression, meaning the decaying and degenerating of it all, as I mentioned in my article some years ago in the Guyana Bar Review.
Thank you, Mr. Kemraj.
Mr. Alert, forbid me if I just ask Mr. Ramjatan. So, Mr. Ramjatan, you know that sorry if I'm encroaching on time, but I just need to throw in this last question. Given that we have a very sensitive society, and knowing that people are very defensive of their religion and what have you, don't you think that persons who are culpable of this act, Mr. Ramjatan and Mr. Hughes, they should be faced, and if not indictment, they should face some form of penalty so that there will not be any recurrence? Because you know that we cannot vilify people's religion.
Well, that is where the striking of the balance is required, Antonio. It is not as if it is easy. In colonial times, the colonial masters put those statutes to get rid of anybody that could attack their regime or the status quo. And it had gone a far extreme. You couldn't talk anything about religion or the Catholic system, although we know what the Catholics have done for colonization and all of that. You could not. So the blasphemy laws that we have in Guyana now is as a result of that colonial period. We should shift the markers to a more liberal democratic society. As to what the shift should be requires constitutional reform. And that is the point I'm making here. In relation to what we have presently in the laws, no, I don't believe that we should start prosecuting and convicting and all of that. Those laws were for a bad, bad time in our country. Slavery days and all them things of and indentureship and colonization and so on. We have to be very cautious as to how we do that now. Because in our constitution, independence and republican status, we have a very expansive freedom of expression provision, which in my view, as a lawyer, we should expand on.
Thank you, Mr. Ramchatan. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, at this point, we have to bring this press conference to a close. As you may be aware, we have a few members of parliament who have to be at a sitting at 2 o'clock. So forgive me as I bring this press conference to a close for today. And I thank you for your participation, members of the media and my colleagues in the Alliance for Change. Thank you.
Hi, Belgium. Bye.